something devastating happens,
Yeah.
and you're out of business because of that event.
Yeah.
That means you're not resilient, and that can be several things. We can go and hypothesize on a whole range of scenarios. Are we prepared? That's the key question. The challenges of these times are not the same ones that require the level of Plan B preparedness 10 years ago.
It's no longer
it's not the
business
same
as
anymore.
usual.
It's no longer business as usual. So it needs to be hands-on.
Great to have you back today. Welcome. Also, you, Ennio, welcome back. Good to have you back.
Yeah, likewise here. Good morning.
We recorded an episode a couple of weeks ago about the energy transition in the broadest sense. And in that episode, we mentioned some of the challenges, by far not all the challenges that we are faced with in this energy transition. And in this episode, we are going to focus on resilience. Like, how can you prepare as a company to overcome some of these challenges? Okay, and what is resilience for people who don't know?
Basically, resilience is when, specifically in the industrial domain, in the business domain, it's when a company can withstand any type of negative issue, downfalls, challenges that companies are faced with from time to time. And in these years, there is much more of that than there was ever before.
For sure.
My perspective on resilience now, the question is, if you look at what's happening geopolitically, climate change, energy transition, reduction of availability of firepower, in this case gas. Wasn't there a need for resilience 10 years ago? Yes, but the peaks and lows of the challenges of time were less. So the predictability of what was, or seasonability, for example, was kind of plannable and therefore and predictable. And therefore, companies could basically plan their production cycles, plan their commercial cycles, plan.
Yeah.
And given today's volatility of let's say the main elements of what allows you to do proper planning, the challenge is, how can we deal with the volatility of normally plannable elements?
Do you think there's a higher level of unpredictability? Not even sure if that's the word.
Yeah, the predictability has been reduced over time, and we're now much more subject to events that occur that cannot necessarily be foreseen, because the variables to circumstances have increased, right? So normally people always say, yeah, but we got a model, and in a model, if you put things into a model, what you do is you follow the formulas in the model, and at the end you get an output. And this is, by the way, the sickness of time and the sickness of society is that we put everything in models, because what we don't consider are the variables that have a devastating impact on almost every model. Now, today we have basically three main unpredictable ingredients that have an impact on the business. So if we talk about manufacturing, if we talk about energy generation, if we talk about refining, even in a refinery, you have to deal with different circumstances than ever before was the case. So today we got the climate change, the climate pressure. So there is climate change, and then there is political pressure, and there is peer pressure, industrial pressure. We have geopolitical challenges, and the geopolitical challenges are even more unpredictable. Mm-hmm. So we got the war, Ukraine, Russia.
Yeah, China.
That has we got the threats around Taiwan, or let's say the tension, not even saying threats, but let's say the tension around China and Taiwan.
Yeah.
If China would take Taiwan, let's just not completely unthinkable scenario. Mm-hmm. and they would basically paralyze the export of computer chips. Then roughly 70% of the world manufacturing that requires these chips to produce their end products would be completely paralyzed.
Yeah.
You know, what are you going to do, right? And this is just one example. The current example that we have, which is not just a scenario, but it's already unfolding in front of us, is the consequences of embargoes of oil and gas from Russia. Now, what you see happening is that the feed of gas that industries need in order to get their energy to manufacture has become more expensive.
Yeah.
At one point, it becomes unbearable, commercially not viable, economically not viable, to continue on the same basis as they ever did before. Why? Because, you know, if you're a loss-making operation, then how long can you last? And this is there are several examples of manufacturing sites that have basically shut down or decommissioned their operations because it was simply no longer feasible for them to exist.
Yeah.
And this is happening on large scales, but it's also happening on very small, small enterprises. The bakery store that can no longer sustain his business because he is not resilient enough to be strong enough to overcome the challenges that the energy question is going to impose on his manufacturing. So, you know, gas. If he has gas ovens, it becomes unbearable in terms of cost, and not even in terms of cost alone, but also the government putting restrictions on his gas consumption. That's one. Yeah. But if he would put everything in electricity, you know, he still would have to make an investment, a huge capital investment in his small business.
Yeah.
And then the electricity comes at the price as well. And if he cannot predict price development in electricity, it will be very difficult for the bakery store and for the owner to give reasonable prices for the consumer to buy his bread.
Yeah, where they cover the costs too.
Yeah, and then, you know, it becomes unbearable because we don't want to pay 20 euros for a little roll.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but this is just to give the dimensions of the process. So the question is, and these are just very simple examples, but the question is, how resilient are the fundamental industries, fundamental to society,
yeah,
to those challenges, right? And personally, I'm not convinced that our fundamental industries are strong enough and resilient enough to face, you know, the challenges when they really hit the ground. You know, another scenario.
What makes you think that?
Because it has never been tested like this before.
Yeah, and they never had to be prepared.
Not to the extent that we are now. You know, we have never been faced with measures around climate change and the energy transition as we are now, which basically is turning upside down the whole thinking around the industry. That's one thing that is already kind of, you know, a mind-boggling exercise for companies to cope with. And then, in addition, we have all these geopolitical challenges. And if you, as an industry, depend from supply from China or from Taiwan, or you depend for your energy, you depend on the price of gas, and that price of gas is determined by how the world market is responding to the embargo that the European Union, for example, is imposing on products from Russia. You know, and by the way, the Russians still sell their products easily because they just sell it to the other BRICS countries, and other places, and then it gets kind of converted back to our market against the premium. So this is why we're paying the higher price, and we're not necessarily achieving the effect that is meant with the embargo, which is basically taking away the funding for the Russian war machine, because that's the
That was the idea, yeah.
So that all of that is not happening. But that, although I care, that's not the point of the resilience. We're faced with the consequences, and then the question is, how resilient are companies to meet all those challenges, and how riskful is it for society? You don't know whether something is coming or not, but if you have the scenario, so let's take a scenario. So Russia now becomes really annoyed with the Netherlands being involved in the war, etc., etc., and they decide to basically bomb the Peace Palace in The Hague.
Okay, that's
one could argue, that's unthinkable. That would never happen. But in this world, as it is today, I don't want to be the one who is excluding certain potential events. And why would it be a potential event, by the way? Because, the Peace Palace, that's the palace of the international justices, where the international court is now, having Mr. Putin being indicted by the international court of The Hague.
Yeah, so you never know. Let's say this is one of the possible events.
Let's say that the question is, what does that trigger?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it will trigger a whole set of activities and actions. Some of them will be panic. Some of them will be frenetic. There will be war declarations. NATO will go into full-scale war. And how can we ensure that the electricity in the Netherlands will remain switched on?
Yeah.
So, in other words, how are companies? What's the emergency response of companies? And there is a whole set of questions and tests to see how that would work.
Okay. So tell me more about that checklist.
Okay. So if we take it from the asset perspective, if we want to keep the asset alive and, between brackets, kicking, what do we need to do? And how does the asset behave in a certain emergency setting? When there's no gas supply, you cannot just switch off a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant, any power plant. You cannot just switch it off. So if that happens, how does the equipment respond?
Yeah.
We don't know. So we need to see. And what if a major, which is probably more a little bit kinder than some bombing of the Peace Palace, which is a little bit of a far-fetched type of negative fantasy. But let's say something that is more realistic, a cyber attack.
Yeah.
Paralyzing the whole of the network and all the safety things. So what will happen if that happens? Is there still like a bypass that can keep the light, that will keep the lights on, that will keep the installation safe? What will happen? And we have developed models and questions and questionnaires and assessments to see how that unfolds.
Many business owners don't really have this thing in mind, to be resilient. And from what I understand from you, if you try to be resilient as a company, you're just more focused on an approach where you where you just focused on preparedness, on response, and on recovery in worst case scenario.
Yes, correct. That is correct. So something devastating happens.
Yeah.
And you're out of business because of that event.
Yeah.
That means you're not resilient, and that can be several things. We can go and hypothesize on a whole range of scenarios, which anyone could think about, with a little bit of fantasy and thinking, or reading the newspaper. That would already help to create some thoughts about that. But
you'll get enough inspiration from there.
Yes, for sure, or watching certain programs. At any rate, the issue is, are we prepared? That's the key question.
Yeah.
And And my personal opinion, like I said before, is I don't think that that companies, to some extent, maybe energy companies, they have a level of preparation that may still be better than average, but the challenges of these times are not the same ones that require the level of Plan B preparedness 10 years ago.
It's no longer
it's not the
business
same
as
anymore.
usual.
It's no longer business as usual. So it needs to be hands-on.
Yeah.
The resilience question needs to resonate, needs to echo in all the departments of the company.
Yeah.
Because it is of existential importance to be at least aware of your own resilience against a certain wave of threats that could happen. And I'm not trying to be paranoid. I'm not trying to be overly in a conspiracy mode or in.
No, you're trying to be resilient.
I try to be realistic because it's so critical to.
I totally get that, but how, as a company, can you assess and measure your level of resilience?
Well, there are several ways, So there are areas. First of all, there are departments like the IT side of things. Then you can test your supply. So where does do a root cause in your supply? So where is your supply coming from? Are you in a battery factory domain, or are you like ASML in Eindhoven? They manufacture chip manufacturing machines. Where do they get their materials from? Where are your sources? What's the risk of supply? That's the key thing. Risk of supply is not just for the energy that you need to manufacture or that you need to produce or whatever. It is also key for the supply of raw material to produce whatever you produce.
Yeah.
So it starts also with testing your supply, whether your supply is resilient, because it's not just about you. You, as a company, are resilient only by the mercy of the resilience of your suppliers.
Basically all the products, and so its suppliers can make you more or less resilient.
Yeah, your supply chain, your value chain needs to be questioned on the resilience of supply, and that's where it starts. It should be part of operations.
Yeah.
At the end.
If I summarize this, resilience for companies means the ability to withstand unexpected events and to overcome them once they happened.
Yeah, to cope with them, to deal with them, to mitigate them, and to continue with their business.
Yeah, and how can companies start with doing this?
Well, first, having the notion.
Yeah.
As management, you need to have the notion of, gosh, ask yourself the first question: are we really resilient for, any reasonable or any thinkable or even potentially even unthinkable event that may occur based on the current parameters of conditions that are occurring left and right?
Yeah.
So that's the first question. And then I would say call us, and we can help you. That's in short, that's what the pitch should be about. But really, in general, it's about an initial awareness at management level, and asking the question, and then maybe doing an initial survey, testing, assessing at first. And then if you are completely satisfied with your findings, then you may not need an external company to audit your resilience.
Yeah.
But if you're not entirely sure, it would be very wise to spend a couple of bucks on doing a resilience
to get that involvement.
check.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thank you for sharing all of this information. Mm-hmm. If there's any topic that you would like to get more information on, or maybe you have any questions, then just let us know. And you never know, maybe one day we can make another topic based on your suggestions.
The main purpose of discussing these topics is to throw in some light on topics that may not necessarily be considered or seen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if there are any questions or topics from people, they can always have a conversation with us, and happy to further develop concepts and ideas.